You in your office, Joe?
Yep. Yeah, I'm in the office.
Okay.
Same as you. And so is Michael.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm Joe Marinucci, President CEO of Downtown Cleveland Alliance, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for our 27th episode of the Downtown Now webinar series. In collaboration with the City of Cleveland and the Downtown Cleveland residents, today we are welcoming a very special guest, Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson. DCA has worked closely with Mayor Jackson for the past 15 years, as well as worked closely with his staff. As the only nonprofit organization dedicated solely to making downtown Cleveland the region's most compelling place to live, work, play, and visit, we have concentrated on building a clean, safe, welcoming, and pedestrian-friendly place that attracts additional investment. In today's final episode of Downtown Now in 2020, Michael Deemer, our Executive Vice President for Business Development, will speak with the mayor about the city's response to the pandemic, the work done to support the vitality of downtown, and then facilitate questions from you, our viewers. And now I'd like to turn the program over to Michael.
Right. Thank you, Joe. And thanks to all of you for joining us on this, our 27th episode of the Downtown Now webinar series. It's our last one of the year. What better way to conclude the webinar series for this year than to be joined by somebody who really needs no introduction to downtown Clevelanders and our residents, a lifelong resident of the city of Cleveland, serving his fourth term as mayor, Mayor Frank Jackson. Joining us, Mayor.
Well, how are you doing? Thanks for having me. And you know, by the way, I don't know if I'm breaking up, but your conversation is breaking up.
It is breaking up a little bit on my end. Let me see if I can make an adjustment here that works. Try this. Well, hopefully this will work a little bit better for you and everybody. But Mayor, before we begin with a few questions and then turn to the audience, I wondered if you might want to just make a few welcoming remarks to our audience, many of whom are downtown residents, but probably not all of them.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'd rather just go straight to the questions so we can have dialogue as opposed to me talking about whatever I'm intending to talk about. It may not be on people's minds. I'd rather hear what's on their minds. So I'd rather go straight to the questions.
That sounds good. I'd like to begin with a few of my own, and then we'll get to the audience. Obviously, the topic on everybody's mind this year is, and right now, is COVID-19 in the pandemic. This year has unfolded very differently than we all thought it would when we began 2020. And I know this is an open-ended question. There's a lot to talk about, but Mayor, I'd like you to tell us about how the city has responded with everything from the restart plan to some of the programs you've put in place to help businesses and individuals, and where we are now.
Well, it's as you know, started in March. This is December, so with 9 months or so that we've been with this, and it looks like we'll be with it for some months to come, even though there's a vaccine. But when it first came in March, latter part of March, and we had our first case, as you know, the virus began to infect people, and we got to a point where there was maybe 25, 30 average cases per day in terms of new infections. With the state of Ohio taking some very aggressive actions in terms of business closures and setting out guidelines for social and business interaction, we followed those guidelines and pretty much enforced them locally. And we were able to get down to probably the low teens and sometimes single digits in terms of new cases. But sometime in maybe October, I believe it was, we began to see another spike And that spike really was attributed to me. It was attributed to the fact that when we began to gradually reopen the economy and gradually allowed for more social and business interaction, that's the way the virus spreads. And it began to spread, and everyone didn't follow the rules. And the gradual reopening depended on everybody following the rules. And that was stay at home unless you have to go out. If you do, wear a mask, keep social distance, and wash your hands. Everyone didn't follow the rules. Either they thought it didn't mean anything or the pandemic was over. And we got this tremendous spike in October to now we sometimes have over 400 new cases a day. I think yesterday was a low day and it was 180 something. And I believe that low count might have been a factor of the state system broke down so they couldn't report all of what they could report back to us. So with all that, you could see that now we have a very serious situation in terms of the spread of the pandemic with new cases. And now there's another threat as to whether or not we'll go back to some lockdown. Now, that's one aspect. During this whole process, as you know, there were some very specific businesses that were asked to close, were told to close by the state, and restaurants, bars, beauty, barber shops, those kind of things. And a lot of small businesses were just didn't receive customers anymore. As a result of that, they were under financial stress. And we put together some programs to help to cover maybe their lease costs for the period of time that they were down, utility bills, things like that. And as time went on and they were able to go back into business, even though they were receiving customers, they still could not make the kind of profits they made before because of the restrictions that was associated with them reopening. Not only the capital side of that in terms of what they had to do to set their place up to create social distancing and the stuff they had to buy in order to sanitize, which was a pretty good cost. So we developed programs to help on that capital side. And then we also put together something to help in their like covering some of their costs, because the best they could do was break even, right? And so we put together those type of programs to attempt to assist businesses. At the same time, through the CARES dollars, the stimulus dollars, we put in programs around rental assistance, utility payments, food service, homeless service, those kind of things to invest in the needs of people as well as the needs of small and medium-sized business. So we have several programs that are still ongoing in regards to both small businesses and to people. But as we move into next year, and as of right now, I don't see, even though they say they're going to pass another stimulus bill, we don't know if that's going to happen. But we still have to provide these services, which is a cost to us. Now, the final thing in regards to this, the impact of this is not just on businesses in terms of loss of profits and an average person in terms of loss of job. It's also an impact on government in terms of loss of revenue, particularly, as you know, the hospitality industry depends on gatherings of people, whether it's at restaurants, at the hotels, the parking tax, admission tax, all these kinds of things that produce revenues for the city of Cleveland. And we were probably just in that alone, we probably lost $25 million just in that alone, not associated with other revenues that, whether it's income tax or other kinds of things associated with the pandemic. So we now have an obligation moving forward, now that we're in the vaccine mode to building an infrastructure to be able to help in the dispensing of the vaccine. So we have to create a new infrastructure, and not only create that infrastructure, we have to staff that infrastructure, and the cost of that is not budgeted in. And so with the stimulus dollars, we use that money to help keep us, try as much as we can to keep us harmless for 2020 so we could balance our budget. And at the same time, we were cutting costs that would be associated with keeping us so that we would not, we could reduce our costs to be more reflective of our revenues. And then finally, we built into this year's budget an economic downturn, even though we didn't know when it was going to come or come in this fashion. We built that in, and as a result of that, we were able to have some dollars to help carry us through. So between stimulus dollars, the built-in downturn dollars, and cost-saving measures, we're about 80% of holding us harmless in terms of revenues lost, and then we're budgeting for next year.
Well, under the circumstances, it's not a bad situation to be in, but I know this is going to be a tough year to budget for as well. A lot of questions coming in related to COVID-19, but before I get to those, I wanted to ask you a question, Mayor, about the other big issue that's been at the fore this year, and that's really the movement for racial equity. This is not new to the city of Cleveland. It's not new to our country, but since the murder of George Floyd in particular, it's been thrust kind of into the public consciousness and into the mainstream. Earlier in the summer, the city of Cleveland took the action of recognizing systemic racism as a public health crisis. Downtown Cleveland Alliance was very supportive of that and rallied other organizations and businesses to support taking that step as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what taking that action has meant to the city, what's happened since, and why that was such an important step to take?
Well, let's put it in proper context. Institutionalized inequity, disparity, and racism has been around for a long time, longer than I am old, and you and everyone else. So it's been here for quite some time, and the system has functioned in that way, and in many cases, in the most egregious cases, it has benefited in terms of wealth creation and access to power and wealth and things like that, based on a system that has been set up to have institutionalized inequity, disparities, and racism. So thinking that we're going to get rid of it because we pass an ordinance, or thinking we're going to get rid of it because of some pronouncement of a mayor or something like that is really naive. It's not going to happen. It's all about the work that you put in, and the kind of work you put in as individual, on an individual level, but also on an organizational and institutional level, and to truly change this, then we have to deal with it, and deal with it in a systemic way. Again, we have to deal with it as individuals, but all of us are part of something, and we have to ensure that what we do in whatever organization or institution or corporation that we exist in, that we do what we need to do to eliminate this inequity, disparity, and racism. And you'll find that when you attempt to do that, you're going to run up against some serious opposition, even from those who profess to be supportive of you. And so let's start with that reality. Now, with that reality, we then, as the city of Cleveland, adopted racism as a public health issue, just like we've adopted violence as a public health issue. And good pronouncement, but how do we now institutionalize that, and what infrastructure do we have to address it? about maybe 3 weeks, a month ago, I introduced legislation to council and they passed it that allowed us to create a new division in the Department of Public Health. And that division is a division of social justice and equity, health equity and social justice. And so we have institutionalized, embedded in the health department, a whole division with a commissioner that we're building out by staffing and things like that, building out who will address these, whose sole purpose is to deal with these issues and to deal with all aspects of them. And for some time now, we've attempted to address the inequity in education, the disparities in education through our Cleveland plan. And I want to thank the people of the city of Cleveland who voted again for our school levy, which was the renewal of 15 meals with another 5 meals added. It was 20 meals. And they approved it by over 60%, which is unheard of, but they did it. So it shows that the community is supportive of our effort to create a more equitable educational outcome and get rid of that disparity. So we're going to work on that. And what the pandemic has done, it has allowed us to understand that the traditional way in which we educate children will not work in the future. As the new norm is created coming out of the pandemic, what is the new norm, not only for business, but for education and for all the social economic aspects of our life, it would be a new norm. And so we're looking at how do we come out of this with a new norm to really position education in a better position so that we can have even a better outcome in terms of educating our children. We're working on creating access to wealth, as to how do people access wealth. And this is not just having a well-paid job. Having a well-paid job is a great thing to have, but it's better to be able to give the job than to go out looking for one. And if you have the ability to give one, then you have more impact and authority on the outcome of the quality of life and the prosperity of the community you represent. So we're looking at that. And so these are the kind of things that we have to do in a holistic way in order to really address this, as opposed to making a pronouncement and saying the right thing and getting a few amens, but not having the infrastructure in place to address it, and having policies and decisions in place that would allow for that infrastructure to gain the outcome that we want. So it's as you can see, it's going to be an ongoing thing. One final thing, I'm old enough to remember segregation, the tail end of it. I'm 74 years old, and so I remember in the '60s, I remember the riots. I was living in Central then, and the riots occurred, and I was in the middle of it. I didn't participate, but I was right there. I was in Vietnam when the riots of '68 happened, and 67 and '68. I was in Vietnam then. So, but when I came back from Vietnam and I went home in Central, it was such a difference in terms of now, because of the urban policies, federal policies around urban renewal, the financial policy around redlining, all those other kind of things. It was complete disinvestment in a particular neighborhoods of the city of Cleveland, all over the country, urban centers. And as a result of that, what we had was the complete destruction of all the commercial strips and lack of investments, and the poorest of the poor being concentrated in very isolated areas that were infested with crime and all that. But I can remember that when I left to go into the Army, into Vietnam, that we had commercial strips, we had nightclubs, barbershop, beautician shop, grocery stores, drugstores, movie theaters, hotels. All of that existed. But when I came back, all of that was gone. So it is important that we have policy, and that was during a civil rights movement when people were talking about doing the right thing. But the policies that they were implementing resulted in a negative impact on community, and we're still feeling that impact today as we are dealing with urban violence and things like that. So this is a very insidious kind of thing, and it takes some real effort and not just political conversation and is and the facade of doing something, but it really takes some rolling up your sleeve, doing some work that you won't get credit for, and that you'll be really criticized for, even from the people you attempt to help.
Well, we're here today in partnership with the downtown Cleveland residents, and one of the things that strikes me as I listen to you relay that history, Mayor, is that I think if we polled our downtown residents, we have a lot of people who are interested in being a part of a diverse and equitable community. They want to be in a city that is leading on addressing all of the issues that we've just talked about. You've talked historically about the importance of downtown's emergence as a neighborhood.
Right.
I wonder if you could share a little bit about what it means to the city of Cleveland from your perspective that downtown has emerged as a neighborhood, what it means for the issues we've just talked about, and where you see it headed.
Well, as you know, when I was council president, and then when I became mayor in 2006, one of the things that I talked about was creating a 24-hour city, a city that was alive 24 hours a day. And which meant that the core of that activity that created that liveliness would be concentrated in downtown. And in order for that to happen, we needed to have a population. We needed to create a neighborhood downtown, not just a business district, but we needed a neighborhood where we had at least 25,000 residents. And when you have 25,000 residents, then you have a traditional kind of neighborhood that would demand amenities, certain types of goods and services that weren't just nightclubs or bars or restaurants, but also those things that you need to live every day. And so it's a real community then. And at the same time, we wanted to be able to increase the number of people who work downtown by attracting businesses, those kind of businesses that would need offices downtown. And when we had the kind of, I forget how they call them, Class B space or Class A or C space, office space, a lot of our space was obsolete in terms of technology and ability to adapt it to the working environment that young people are used to now. And so what happened was a lot of that got converted to residential. Mm-hmm. And that helped on the population increase. And then when I became mayor, I think we had about 5,000 people living downtown. We probably have closer to 20 now, something like that. Yeah. And now at the same time, we had the ability, since the young people were moving into downtown, and we were improving the school district so that if they got married and they had children of school age, then we wanted to give them an option as to where to put their child, because many people would leave because they didn't have confidence in the school system. So it was important for us to develop a school system too, to keep people, to attract people and to keep people. Then we wanted to have it so that the young people didn't want to drive to somewhere. It would be nice for them if they could just walk to their job. A lot of them were in IT. A lot of them were in those kinds of areas where knowledge-based kind of economy. And so we became a very attractive area to fill up office space downtown associated with that knowledge kind of economy. And then the final leg to that stool was that we believe that in order for us to really get over the hump and be a 24-hour city, we couldn't just depend on residents. and we just couldn't depend on people working. We had to attract people here, and that's where the hospitality industry came in. And that's why we went after the gay games, to show that we were a welcoming city, that we were a diverse city, and to get our name known for that. We went at the Republican National Convention, even though I'm a Democrat, the economic benefit of that and the public relations of that, if we pulled it off right, where Cleveland would get the kind of exposure you couldn't purchase anywhere. And then with the Indians and the Cavaliers and the Browns and the restaurants and the hotels and all that, we began to, and then a new casino, we began to move into, we had people just moving in and out of the city, who didn't necessarily live here, didn't work here, but they visited. So it was those three legs of the stool that we worked on and made a concerted effort to make those things happen. Now, part of my job was to get out the way, because a lot of people in positions like this get in their own way. And so part of my job was to get out the way and let it happen, and let those people who actually know what they're doing do the work. You know, that was my vision, and that's the approach I wanted to take. And so now I needed to get out the way, and then we as government help to underwrite development in that regard, help to underwrite economics in that regard, and help to underwrite the visitation in that regard.
Well, I'm glad you said that at the end, because I think from our perspective, you've done far more than simply get out of the way. You've been a very helpful partner in building the downtown neighborhood, which we're very grateful for. One question that dovetails nicely off of what we were just talking about that just came in from the audience is you laid out very clearly the three legs of the stool
Right.
that you worked on. And, the question that we're getting from the audience, it's on everybody's mind, is, how does the city position itself for a strong post-pandemic recovery, given everything that's happened over the last year?
Well, that is what ultimately the question is, because we're going to get through this. The only question is, how will we look once it's over with? And I'm a firm believer that you plan for good times and bad times, because if you wait for good times to happen, it's too late then. And you plan for bad times and good times. And so that's our model. So we're looking forward, we're planning for that new world. The problem is that we don't know what it is. So we have two things we have to do, and both of them are just as important. One is we have to survive the moment. We cannot die. That's how we were able to survive the economic downturn, the Great Recession of 2008 and 9, is that we were able to financially come out of that, even though we took a hit, so that when, even though we had a hard landing, we didn't crash and we didn't go into bankruptcy. We were able to make the necessary cost-cutting measures to balance our budget. But at the same time, while we were reduced revenue, we were investing in development projects so so when it came time for that recession to be over with, we already had shovels in the ground. So we were moving. The same thing has to happen here. We have to survive. So what we're doing in Survive is, as I mentioned, we budgeted for a downturn. We didn't know it was going to come in the first quarter of the year, and we didn't know the pandemic would cause it, but we budgeted for that, for a downturn. It did happen. At the same time, we immediately did cost-cutting measures so that we could reduce the cost of our operation without impacting our service delivery. And when the COVID money came in, we used that. Our shortfall, the COVID money made up for about 80% of our shortfall. So we're able now to carry over in the next year a balance that would help to cover the deficit between what it's going to cost us to operate the city next year based on the estimated revenue, they're different. So we're going to be able to carry over money to fill that gap. So we're going to, in doing that, we're going to survive. Now, in doing that survival, we're also investing in keeping our small, medium-sized businesses, trying to help them to survive. And so we're trying to position ourselves so that when it's all said and done, when the pandemic is over and the economy begins to come back, we're already positioned. And all we have to do is go into the next gear. So it's those two things. Now, if you ask me the specifics of it, I wouldn't be able to tell you that right now because it's so uncertain. But I do know that we have the NFL draft next year. It's sometime in late March. Yeah, April. I know the Destination Cleveland is all on top of that. All on top of that in terms of, and we hopefully that will be able to be more in person than it is virtual. If it is more in person than it is virtual, then what will happen is you'll see the hospitality side of that with hotels, the restaurants, the nightclubs, the casino, all of that, and activity going on. So we're moving, we're positioning, we're surviving, and then we're positioning so that when this is over with, regardless of what needs to be done, we can move in that direction. We have to be that fluid and flexible about it. And a lot of that has to do with the private sector, not us. We will be supportive of things, but the investments that have to be made and the risk that have to be taken to a large degree, we can help underwrite risk, but we cannot pay for the risk. And so there's a lot of it's going to have to do with the private sector and how much confidence they have in their future.
Well, speaking of being the need to be adaptive and flexible, we've all, the private sector, public sector, we've all had to find ways to adapt over the last year, and we're trying out new things. We've had a couple of variations on the same question come in from the audience.
Yes.
And the gist of it is, what sorts of things has the city done to adapt this year that might become more permanent, or that we may have learned from and can apply constructively in a non-pandemic environment? A couple folks have given the example of, creating the expanded outdoor seating capacity, and the way restaurants have used igloos to have people eat outside even when it's cold. And so, and I know at DCA, we're looking at strategies of, well, gee, how do we encourage people to come be outside even when it's winter? Because it's a little bit safer to be outside enjoying yourself than it is to be indoors. And that's something we ought to be doing in a regular environment. So from the city's perspective, what kinds of things have happened this year that you maybe tried and learned from, and we can see maybe continue?
Well, let's look at it this way. What you're speaking of is really what the lesson and the opportunities that is created in the private sector in that hospitality industry. I'm pretty sure that in the corporate community, the use of Zooms and not having the necessity to be in person, and with the advent of technology in a way that we're using it now, that there's a better way to do things that helps them reduce their costs and be just as productive. So we're all going to learn. But from the city's perspective, what we do, our bottom line is not profit. We're not in the business of making money. Our bottom line is service delivery. And so we're measured by how well we deliver service, and not only in quantity, but also in quality. And if we're unable to deliver that service, then we're just as bankrupt as a corporation who cannot make a profit and pay their shareholders. But we have different, we both use similar practices in terms of businesses, but there are certain points where we go in different directions based on what our bottom line is. So in that respect, one of the things that we are going to, it became more, even though we knew it, but now we're going to have, we're having to do it, is really the creating more efficiency through technology, whether it's permitting online, whether it's death certificates, birth certificates, just the everyday mundane kind of thing creates a more convenient service for the public. We're with the collapse of the recycling market, pretty much, in terms of we used to be able to recycle, and we had a buyer, and we would buy the recyclables, and you could sell it for a little money and cover the cost of you collecting this stuff. Now you have to pay people to take that stuff away, right? So how is it that we're going to continue to recycle and then have to pay somebody to do that? So we're doing a study around that and to see how does that play into how do we deliver that particular service going forward. So for us, it's more about the service. Now, the other thing is, because we've gone through this with the small and medium-sized businesses, and there has been some relationships that have been created because of particularly with restaurants and barbershops, beautician shops. There is the ability for us to have the growth in certain sectors of our economy, and to be able to assist that, because now we have an infrastructure in place to assist. And that's very helpful in terms of us being able to expand a certain aspect of our sector of our economy. Now, education is a big thing. Even though we don't run the school system, it is part of the public sector. With this new technology and the fact that everything is virtual, and we know that our young people, the way that they learn, the way that they retain and demonstrate comprehension is through technology. And that the old traditional way of education in a classroom, in a building, is boring to them to a great extent. It doesn't keep their attention. The problem with this virtual thing they're doing now is that there's no accountability or insurance that somebody's doing their work. If you don't have a parent making you do it or something like that, there's no insurance that they are doing it. But it does point that the new way of education will have to be in a very technology-driven way that does not mean all the time that you have to be in a room somewhere. And this interactive kind of approach to life with young people keeping their attention is going to be, I think, the wave of the future. So how do we reinvent education? How do we reinvent the relationship between government and the private sector to have a real partnership, not one telling the other one what is they should be doing? But how do you do that? And even with the downtown alliance in the business is downtown, they relied a lot on the property owners have relied a lot on leases from people who are not able to pay those leases. And then the question is to, particularly for downtown residents, is to what then becomes the activity that they're expecting, since it's 20,000 of them now. Do they expect to have a bar next door now, or a nightclub or a restaurant? Would they prefer to have a grocery store? Would they prefer to have this or some other amenity? So we're talking about a real neighborhood now. And then, so there have to be decisions made as to when people enter into lease, who are they leasing to? And what services are they providing? And if those services are the services that are in demand by the residents, or is it just the most convenient lease because they pay the most money per square foot? See, all that stuff is going on right now.
Yeah. Well, I should point out that we have a comment, not a question, from one of your colleagues. Councilman Tony Brancatelli has endorsed the experience of pulling building and housing permits online says it's been great. So thank you
Good.
for that.
Well, that's the, he's comes from a development back. He was when I was a councilman, he was in charge of the Slavic Village Development Corporation, and part of my ward when I was in North Broadway was in their footprint. So I've known him for some time, and that's his world, development and dealing with those kinds of things.
Well, we've gotten a couple of questions about something, a potential opportunity for downtown that we've been talking about at DCA in terms of growing the residential population. You know, we've always been big proponents of the live work experience of downtown. You know, live downtown and walk to work. And as you alluded to earlier, the experience of work is changing, and there's a lot more flexibility now. And you know, we're beginning to hear stories from residents of, you know, people working in New York, but you know, living in downtown Cleveland, and you know, we're looking at, you know, whether that may be a real growth opportunity for us, given the quality of life that we can offer in downtown, in the city, and the cost of living. I wonder, is that an issue that is on your radar screen, something that you may see?
Well, you brought it up. Now that you mention it, I do know a couple of people who, because of the COVID, that they were their workplace was in place like Chicago and New York, but they've come home to Cleveland. Their problem is that they still have a lease arrangement in New York and Chicago, so they're paying a higher lease amount. But if it were not for that, and if they could live here and work online for Chicago or New York, their dollar would go much further here than it would there. So I think that is an advantage if in fact they're working for a company that would allow that type of work experience, that it would be much cheaper in terms to live here in Cleveland, because even though we're not Chicago and New York or Boston or LA, and in the sense that people think of them, we still have the similar or the same amenities, but we have but it's cheaper here. It may not be as many choices, but there are still choices, and it's cheaper here. And I will tell you that that quality of life and prosperity are the two underlining things that really measure a city. And the question is whether everyone can share in that quality of life and prosperity. And you know, that goes to the point of inequity, disparity, and racism. And we're not there yet. But even those who are able to be part of that prosperity and that quality of life, Cleveland provides that, because we're like a big small town. We have the amenities of a larger urban center, even though the choices aren't as many, but we have the hospitality of a small community, and which is very unique, and I guess a Midwestern Ohio kind of thing. So I hadn't thought about that, but now that you mention it, it's on my mind, and we'll make sure I talk to my economic development director to see how we can put together something that would incentivize that, maybe.
We'd love to work with you on that.
Okay.
And in a similar vein, we have another question from the audience about the need for more for sale housing in downtown in particular. As we talked about, the three legs of the stool and building downtown neighborhood, we've been real successful as a downtown, working with the city to build and adapt a lot of apartments.
Right.
Still not a lot of for sale options,
Right.
although we see and sense demand. So I wonder, from your perspective, are there things that the city can do to help develop more for sale housing in downtown?
Well, a quick answer is yes. And let me give you a little historical perspective on that. When before the recession of 2008-9, there was for sale market downtown. As a matter of fact, the avenue was for sale. Now it's rental. Same thing with many of the apartments, the conversion of office buildings into apartments were for sale. But because of the financial collapse of 2008 and 2009, the ability to get mortgages for condominium type living just went away. And so what we had was the owners of those properties could just convert them into rental. And they found that to be very profitable because you now have quality living environment that was pretty spacious, that was built for condominium kind of thing, but now you can rent it, and you're renting it at Cleveland rental prices. And so and so that's why we were at 90, 95% or more occupancy, and you had to wait months before you could get in just to rent a place. And that was even during the recession and post-recession. So it became very profitable. Now, the key here, however, as you're indicating, is that having the ownership of homes in downtown is more of a permanent thing as opposed to this transient nature of rental. And because even though it's downtown and even though it's a good quality living for a reasonable price, it's still transient because people are not tied into some mortgage and they're not in ownership. So yes, we would like to have a higher level of home ownership downtown, and whether it's in the converted office space or in newly built condominiums or townhouses and all of that. Yeah, we would like that, but again, the market will take care of that as the cost of debt is cheaper, and when developers see that they can go in and build and have a quick turnover of and not have to sit on debt for a while waiting for somebody to buy, it'll happen, and we would gladly incentivize that through our various programs.
Mayor, I'd like to circle back. We talked a little bit earlier about the challenges to the budget in 2020. You have a bunch of unforeseen expenses in 2020. The challenges entering the 2021 budget cycle. As we're watching what's going on in Columbus at the State House, there's some proposals that could be really tough on cities like Cleveland. You could probably explain the issue to the audience better than I can, but we have a lot of people who work in downtown Cleveland who live in the suburbs but pay income tax to the city of Cleveland, and we have legislators in Columbus that don't want the city to be able to collect that income tax from people who are living in the suburbs, typically would come into work in downtown but are currently working remotely. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the importance of that issue and what you're hearing about it, and whether there are things that our viewers can do.
Right now, there are two things going on. There's legislation when the governor declared this emergency around the pandemic, he was very specific in saying, and I think legislation was passed or supported, that where you could tax, the taxing authority is where the job was, not where you working from home. It was where the job was. So where the job is. So he was very specific to that. What is going on in Columbus is an attempt to repeal that aspect of the law to say that if you're working for home, then you should be paying whatever the income tax rate is in wherever you live. All right. Then there's another avenue that people are approaching this from, where they created a court case in Franklin County that really talks about this issue about work from home and who should have the taxing authority, even though it's very clear that state law says the taxing authority is where the job is, not where if you're working from home. Even though it's very clear, they're challenging that as to whether or not it's constitutional, I guess, or something like that. So that's the underlying issue. Now, the impact of that is when you have the pandemic and you have a substantial number of people working from home, and when the vast majority of the income tax that is paid in the city of Cleveland is paid by people who don't live here, but they come here to work, then the impact of that is that whatever percentage that is that's working from home, you lose that in terms of revenues, which could be tens of millions of dollars. It could be tens of millions of dollars. And so that's the negative impact. Now, the question is, what is the real impetus? What is the real driving force around this? There are suburban communities who have the same concerns that we have. Just because urban community is a bedroom community, many of them do have businesses where they have the same situation we have, that the people living in the community don't work there. They may work somewhere else, and the job that's there may be from somebody else living in another. So they have the same issue we have. So the question is, what's really driving this? I don't know if it's more of a township issue, particularly if you have higher paying wages of people who would say, well, in my township or in my little community, I pay 1%, but in Cleveland, I pay 2.5%. So I would have more money to take home if I didn't have to pay the 2.5%. I'd rather pay the 1%. So is that what's going on? And also there's a lot of underlining motivation kind of things here. But that being said, the legislature has not passed the repeal as of yet. And if they do pass it going into next year, our concern is that they don't make it retroactive and make it going forward, then we just have to deal with it. If they make it retroactive, then you have to pay back everybody's money. And how do you know who did and who did not, right? How do you know? You really don't know. And with the court case, I don't know how that's going to turn out, because once things get into the judicial system, it could go anyway. And if there's whatever happens there, I'm pretty sure it's going to be appealed to the state Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, and then to the Supreme Court.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time and our viewers' time. We're coming up on our hour. And Mayor, I wanted to ask if you could share some closing thoughts with us as we head into the holidays and conclude the series.
Well, let me raise an issue that you have not raised, but I believe is on people's mind, and which I believe is a legitimate issue, and that is public safety. And even though it was not asked, it is something that I believe should be addressed because it's legitimate. And I know that downtown is really seeing what they believe to be a rise in various types of criminal activity, whether it's breaking into cars or carjacking, or might be mugging people, whatever it might be. And people have a right to not only feel, but be safe in their community. But I will also say this, that there are areas of the city of Cleveland who are traditionally not used to crime. They're pretty much, in general, safe. And whenever there's a criminal act that is committed, it becomes a very unique situation. There are other parts of the city that if they had that level of crime, they would think they were living in paradise. And so that does not excuse the fact of there's crime, because crime should not occur anywhere. But I want people to have a context and a perspective on this. And because we know the significance of downtown, particularly since downtown was one of the key linchpins of a three-legged stool that I talked about, then safety and security not only perception, but reality was essential for us to accomplish the three-legged stool. That is why we put in effect, downtown is the only place where you have your own specific people assigned to downtown. And they spend a lot of time doing, when we had thousands of people downtown on a daily basis, commuting in and out, and then doing, whether they went to a ball game, went to a concert, was part of whatever was going on in downtown at night, the casino. They undercover wise and visibility wise, they were out there ensuring that safety. And we haven't drawn back from that. As a matter of fact, we've kept that. And Commander Todd, as you know, I appointed her as the commander of the 3rd District. She's a very interactive kind of person, right. And she addresses concerns. So if you raise it, it's legitimate, she's on it. Absolutely. But it does not take away from the fact that the crime was committed. It doesn't take away from it, right? And so I just want you to understand that we do pay special attention to downtown, and we also have to adjust the type of law enforcement that we're doing based on the neighborhood and what's going on in that neighborhood. Where there's a higher levels of crime, like I say, they would think they were living in paradise with certain level of crimes. There's a type of enforcement there that is around gang activity, drug activity, homicides, those kind of crimes associated with violence and all this. And so there's a lot of that type of activity there, where there's just a crime that can be deterred from visibility, or spotters who would know that somebody's breaking into cars at a certain time in a parking lot, and they're watching it so that they see it happen, then they can swoop down on them and catch, then they do that kind of stuff. Where there's in other neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods, where there's maybe break-ins and breaking into people's homes, single family homes and stuff, is usually done by the same group of people, and they cause havoc. Then there's a concentrated effort to gain information so that they can catch that group. And once they catch that group, then that crime goes away for a period of time. So I want you to know that there's a overall general deployment of police, and that we address the various levels of crime and types of crime depending on the neighborhood. And downtown has special attention around a designated, I think 20 or 30 police officers over a 24/7 kind of operation just for downtown, plus a commander who you can talk to on a regular basis, where you will get some response. But I know it's a problem. And it doesn't matter that it doesn't happen as often as it happens over here. You can't measure misery by saying my misery is worse than yours. Misery is misery to you, and that's irrelevant to somebody else, right? Your misery is misery to you, and that misery of crime, even at a lower level, is a legitimate concern that downtown residents should have, and we're working on it. I just want them to know that as we wrap this up, that I'm aware of that, and that we are addressing it in the way that we can.
Well, and I just want to reiterate much of what you just shared, Mayor. We have a terrific partnership with the City of Cleveland when it comes to addressing safety issues, and as you've said, safety is really the foundation from which so many other good things flow. And
quality of life.
Your team and Commander Todd in particular have been incredibly responsive. I think it's also worth noting for the downtown resident that we're working on, I think, some very constructive things together, your team and ours, to address some of the things that aren't really law enforcement matters. They're more instances of mental health crises, and that call for different kinds of intervention. And I think your team and ours are doing a very nice job of working together to find
and on that point, you're right. Downtown in all urban centers is the magnet for homelessness and and for those issues associated with homelessness. As you know, homelessness has many faces. It's not just homelessness. You have people falling through the cracks that lost their job. It's momentary homelessness. You have homelessness, maybe a young lady with her children trying to get out of a domestic violent situation at home. You have homelessness based on mental health or drug addiction or alcoholism or dual or triple diagnosed. So there is a very complex, homelessness is a very complex issue. And one of the things that we've attempted to do over the years is to not demonize them or because they're homeless and not just come down on them and be hard on them because they're homelessness, but try to deal with them in a way that kind of keeps them dispersed. So you don't have that concentration, even in the sense, panhandling used to be a big issue. And there was an attempt to pass some legislation that, in my opinion, was not the best legislation. It was too onerous and too strict on people in regards saying, basically, if you homeless and you ask for something, you can go to jail. And the courts found that not to be acceptable, and I happen to agree with. But it did not take away from the issue that you have some very aggressive panhandlers. Mm-hmm. So how is it that we deal with that? How is it that we deal with that? Particularly when you have areas where they tend to concentrate, like Public Square, around Tower City and that entrance right over there. If there's a food program going on, they'll gravitate there. Those kinds of things. So we try to work with the homeless community and the service providers to keep that so it's not concentrated just in one area. Usually that concentration is in the downtown, and we try to prevent that from happening.
Well, as I said, it's a good, strong partnership, and really appreciate your team working with us so well on all those issues. I do want to give you the opportunity. I know. Thank you for addressing the safety issues, but are there any concluding thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with as we wrap things up for the year?
Look, hang in there on the pandemic. Just hang in there. We'll come out of this. It's going to be over with. What it looked like on the other end is we don't know yet. But one thing I do know is that if we don't grapple with it, if we don't get into the fight, that it will end up, and how it end up will not be in our favor unless we engage it. And so we're attempting to engage it in a way to position us for the future and to do those things necessary for us to survive as the public sector government, and for the help small downtown businesses and other small neighborhood businesses survive through the process. And we are happy to work with Downtown Alliance and that partnership, and with downtown residents as they interact with our community relations people and with the police.
Well, Mayor, thank you so much for your time today and being so generous with your insights as well as your time. We really appreciate you being with us. Thanks to the downtown Cleveland residents for joining us as well and partnering with us on this event. Mayor, I'd like to wish you a happy holiday season, and all of our viewers as well.
All right. Stay home unless you have to go out. If you do, wear a mask, social distance, and wash your hands. Talk to you later.
Great message. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you for the Downtown Now webinar sometime in January. Happy holidays and Happy New Year.